My name is Angela Di Fulvio, and I am an associate professor at the Nuclear Plasma and Radiological Engineering Department at the University of Illinois. The talk will be with a focus on therapeutic radiology and the need to implement radiation protection in this domain. We will review a couple of external radiotherapy techniques, in particular, some of the work that my group is doing to integrate machine learning in the clinical workflow, as well as new approaches for range verification and in vivo dosimetry, especially suited for ion therapy. But before we get started, let's set some of the terminology and the background to be in the US. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission sets the limits for the maximum annual dose that radiation workers can receive. And these are 5 rams as total effective dose. At the same time, the public cannot receive more than 1.1 ram in 1 year due to external and others radiation-related operations. However, there is one case from the audience what this is. So what is the case when really these limits do not apply? Anyone from the audience wants to try to answer the question? I don't see anything in the chat, so I'll go ahead. These limits obviously do not apply in radiation, and specifically we don't want tumor cells to receive doses much higher than the limits to make sure that cancer cells are killed and the tumor regresses. At the same time, however, the surrounding tissues, the healthy tissues, so then while the tumor cells are damaged, the surrounding healthy tissues are spared by these high doses. And this is the sense, this is the main goal of radiation therapy in therapeutic radiology. Being able to deliver the highest possible dose, minimizing the dose to surrounding healthy tissues. To maximize survival rate of the patients, and maximize also the quality, life quality after the treatment. So in the next few slides, I'll summarize some of the important concepts in radiation therapy that motivate the approaches towards radiation protection. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but nonetheless, we're going to briefly have an overview. So we have this concept ready to understand and later the research work. What you see on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side here is a schematic view of a cell cycle. So as you know, cells do replicate through mitosis, and the mitosis essentially entails the exact duplication of the genetic material inside the cell to be then used to create another cell which is exactly the same as the initial one which replicated. This mitosis part is indeed a very small portion of the full cell cycle, but it is the time when the cell is most sensitive to the damage from radiation. Because if radiation has an effect, as a detrimental effect on the DNA chain, for example, this effect will be propagated to the new cell that is produced. Interestingly, from the mitosis, the cell can go into the so-called G0 phase. And the G0 phase is nothing else than a rest phase. So the longer the cell stays at rest, the more radiation resistant it is. Because during the rest phase, it's not replicating, it's not duplicating the genetic material, and therefore the damage will not directly propagate to the next cell that is produced. Cells like neurons, for example, do not replicate often. They have a very long lifetime. So they are not so radiation sensitive. And at the same time, cells that replicate very often, such as those from the epithelium, they are extremely radiation sensitive. The damage from an external radiation in practice is an ionization. But when this ionization is affecting the molecules of the proteins that build the DNA, then the DNA is disrupted. Depending on the ionization density of the interacting radiation, we can have a single strand break or a double strand break. Intuitively, a double strand break is much harder to recover from compared to a single strand break. And particles that have a low ionization density, such as electrons produced, for example, by X-rays, therefore have a higher probability of having a single hit, so single strand break. Whereas particles like heavy charged particles, like alpha particles or protons, they have a higher ionization density, more likely to cause double strand break, and therefore the damage is harder to be recovered from, to be repaired. And at the same time, we can have a wrong repair. So these can cause chromosomal aberrations. These are important to understand different types of radiation that can be used in external radiotherapy. So we learned that cells, depending on how often they replicate, they can be more or less radiosensitive. At the same time, they can have a different sensitivity to different radiation, mainly owing to their ionization density. I didn't tell you one important thing, which is that this damage, the direct damage to the DNA chains, is in fact unlikely. The damage that occurs more likely is the so-called indirect damage, whereas the ionization occurs in molecules surrounding the DNA, and especially those that contain oxygen, and the production of free radicals and very reactive, chemically reactive species then further enhances this damage. Both lead to cell death, but in reality, the indirect damage is much more likely to occur compared to the direct damage. So let's take a look at the effect on cell cultures of the radiation. You see here on the y-axis the fraction of survival, the survival fraction of cells, and as a function of the dose. This is the total survival fraction is S, is this line here, interpolated from measured data. And these can be seen as the combination of the sum of two components. One which is called the apoptotic depth, which is a controlled depth, and another one which is the mitotic link depth, which is a less controlled depth, mainly having this quadratic behavior. These two components then combine together, cause the so-called linear quadratic cell survival model, which allows us to plan the treatment in radiation therapy accurately to maximize the survival of healthy tissues as well as the dose to tumor cells. So once we know this, we can effectively design a radiation therapy treatment. I want to point you at this figure on the right, on the top right here, where we have the survival fraction still as a function of dose. And we have two behaviors. As you can see, we say that we have a constant delivered dose right here, and we have that late responding tissues, most of normal tissues are so-called late responding ones, have a higher survival fraction at the same dose compared to the tumor and early responding tissue. I'm just going to use a laser pointer. So at a given dose, in this early region here, we are going to have a higher survival rate in the healthy tissues compared to tumors. Tumor tissues, cancer cells. And this is a very important differential response, which allows us to plan the treatment plans accordingly. So if we need to deliver a certain dose to the tumor, the most effective way to do so is to actually deliver it in fractions. And these fractions are shown here in this plot, where you can see that we have the survival fraction of the cells as a function of a fractionated dose delivery treatment. So in other words, we are going to deliver first dose treatment. These are of the order of a few grays to the tumor, and then wait. During this wait time, the normal cells, the healthy cells, will recover faster and better compared to tumor cells. And then we are going to continue delivering the dose in further fractions. The effect of this will be that the tumor cells will be more damaged as compared to the healthy cells, which surround the tissue and receive a fraction of the dose. So this is the idea. So when we plan a treatment, we need to determine these fractions to maximize the damage to the tumor while sparing as much as possible surrounding healthy tissues. Another important concept that we want to have for this to discuss the radiation protection in radiation therapy is the relative biological effectiveness. So we said that different types of radiation have a different ionization density, and therefore high ionization density particles such as ions have a higher probability of a double strand break, which is a more difficult to recover type of damage. This directly causes the protons, for example, to have a so-called higher relative biological effectiveness. This is which is defined as the ratio of a dose of photons to a dose of any other particle to produce the same biological effect. The biological effect for us now is the survival rate of the cells, which we just learned about. So you see that to obtain the same survival rate, we need a much higher dose from X-rays compared to ions. And this means that typically charged particles have a higher RBE compared to X-rays. Protons, for example, are approximately 10 times more effective than X-rays in terms of RBE. Okay. I would like to go to the next slide, but I see a couple of questions. So if oh, okay.
No, you're good, Angela.
Was that Ricardo?
You're good. You're good.
Okay.
They're not.
Okay, so the next difference between charged particles and X-ray in external radiation therapy is actually the spatial distribution of the dose. When we irradiate a patient using external X-rays, the highest dose is relatively close to the entrance of the patient. Whereas when we use charged particles, such as protons, the highest dose is actually delivered close to the end of the path of the particles. This end of the path and this peak in the delivered dose is known as the Bragg peak, and it is the peak where, while the ion slows down, its ionization density goes up incredibly, following the physics of ion interactions in tissue. And this is another extremely important difference that then affects the radiation therapy planning, essentially. When we, you can imagine that when we use charged particles to perform external radiation therapy, we may need to irradiate a region that is relatively larger than the region that the Bragg peak would cover by itself. So we resort to what is typically called the spread out Bragg peak technique. It's essentially changes slightly the energy of the impinging charged particles to achieve a slightly different depth of the Bragg peak in the tissue. So then the superimposition of all these beams ultimately will be able to cover the full volume of the tumor. This difference in the spatial interactions and in the ionization density then is causing the difference in the conformality of the therapy of the radiation therapy treatment. So what you see here is in these two CT scans is a treatment delivered to the spine of a subject. And on the top, you see a conformal X-ray, external X-ray radiation therapy treatment. And at the bottom, you see on the sagittal and cross-sectional view of the patient, you can see the proton therapy dose, the dose delivered by the proton therapy. As you can see, we have a color bar here. The color bar shows the intensity of the delivered dose. And it's immediate to see how, in the case of the proton therapy, the dose is much more confined to the region to irradiate compared to the X-ray therapy, because of the existence of the Bragg peak in the proton therapy and the lack of it in the X-ray therapy that we just discussed. However, while there are obvious advantages when using charged particles to perform radiation therapy, there are also some drawbacks. One of these is the production of secondary fragments. I'm sure you've noticed that the energies at stake for external ion beam treatment are much higher compared to X-rays. We need a much higher energy for protons to penetrate tissue, patient tissue, compared to the X-rays, which penetrate much easier. So these high energy increases also the probability that other reactions can occur. And these other reactions are typically inelastic scattering reactions, which will cause secondary fragments. The secondary fragments are not focused, not as focused as the primary beam, and they do deliver a certain dose to the surrounding organs, increasing that dose to the surrounding healthy tissues that instead we want to minimize. So this is a problem that needs to be addressed, and is particularly severe when we deal with higher Z ions, such as carbon ions, whereas is less relevant in the case of protons. Just as a reminder, these there are at the moment about 12 centers worldwide that deliver ion therapies, and they are mostly based on proton therapy facilities. Actually, higher 12 facilities that deliver higher Z ions, so such as carbon or alpha particles. This is another way of seeing this phenomenon, where we have the recoil fragments in red and cells killed by ionization, And we can see that the fragments are present indeed also at the entrance of the beam for 200 MeV proton beam in water, but they definitely increase at the Bragg peak. And these are typically nuclear inelastic interactions. So this is one of the last slides that shows us a comparison of the out-of-field neutron and gamma ray doses in phantom, in a water phantom. So in very similar reproducible conditions, when the phantom was irradiated by X-rays and by proton spot scanning proton field. The target was by treatment design was set to be between -50 here and 50 millimeters around the isocenter, which is at 0, and what you can see here in the green line, the green curve is the photon dose out of the target in the case of the proton irradiation, whereas the other colors here are the photon out of field dose due to X-rays of various energies. We can immediately see something that we've already learned, that is that the out-of-field dose in the case of proton therapy is much lower compared to the X-ray treatment in this case. So this is a measurement setup that shows us directly what we just discussed. So to conclude this first part, X-ray external radiotherapy provides a reliable tool for tumor control and treatment, and is a well-established practice for approximately 50% of cancer cases. In the US, this affects approximately 3 million people per year. Adjuvant therapy at the same time is an emerging technique which is promising because it exhibits better conformality, higher RB, but at the same time it produces secondary products which may not be desirable for the surrounding healthy tissues. In both cases, integrated personalized treatment and dosimetry are needed to perform dosimetry possibly in vivo and potentially giving to the clinicians the ability to adjust the treatment in real time if needed. So the rest of this presentation will focus on these two tools to implement these two tasks that we are exploring in my group. I wanted to stop here for a minute and ask if there's any question on this. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead, and we will first talk about some machine learning segmentation in radiotherapy to improve the radiation treatment planning. Radiation treatment planning is a complex procedure that is performed before the delivery of the treatment. We talked about the importance of optimizing the dose that is delivered, but at the same time, also this dose needs to be suitably adapted to the patient. So typically a CAT scan of a patient is taken at the very beginning, and then this CAT scan is merged with the different radiosensitivity of the tissue and the RB of the radiation to optimize the dose delivery, especially to the region where we want it to be. One important step of this image processing is the image segmentation. So in this case, the tumor and surrounding healthy tissues are segmented, so their volume is outlined. And the objective is, again, to maximize the dose to the tumor while minimizing the dose to the surrounding healthy tissues. Before the treatment, there is typically a check with a CAT scan, but the treatment is typically not designed again. So during each of the fractions that we talked about, the treatment plan stays essentially the same as it was designed at the beginning. So our goal here is to automate this stage, the image segmentation, and potentially then also the dose delivery stage, to make this whole process much faster, and hence enabling it to be performed every time before each treatment, and not only at the beginning. So we studied this type of approach, which is called adaptive radiation therapy treatment, for a particularly important case, which is prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is the most frequently diagnosed cancer in men, and it's particularly important not just for its significance, but also because the prostate is surrounded by highly radiosensitive regions, which are the bladder and the rectum. So it's a perfect case to apply that radiation protection methods that we discussed. What you can see here is the prostate, which is going to be the volume where we want our dose to be maximized, the bladder here, and the rectum. In the current clinical practice, to account for the fact that the prostate can change its volume, can change its position during the different fractions, what is typically done is that a margin around the prostate is set. This margin can be out to 1 centimeter and even larger. So then this is a safety margin around the region to be treated, to make sure that the surrounding regions don't receive a dose which is too high. So in the conventional radiation therapy, this safety margin is determined during the generation of the plan, and then the plan is delivered every time roughly the same before at each fraction. Treatments typically can span across tens of fractions. What we want to do is, in fact, to perform again this adaptive radiation therapy every time. And this, of course, if we were to do it traditionally, this would require the involvement of the medical physicists, the oncologist, and all the specialists who contribute to making the plan. But if part of this planning can be automated, then this procedure can be performed in a more straightforward way, and becomes doable also at not so large hospitals that do not have large teams to repeat the treatment plan every time. So our approach here focuses on the image segmentation. We want to speed up as much as possible the image segmentation of the prostate. And to do that, we use a type of neural network approach, which is called point cloud. I'll show you why we choose this. But the workflow is the following. So first, we use a convolutional neural network, which is called the MaskR-CNN, to find broad, large bounding boxes around the regions of interest, prostate, bladder, and rectum. Then we only sample the points inside these bounding boxes. And within these points, we identify and classify using the PointNet++ point cloud neural network to identify the 3 organs of interest here. Again, the prostate, the rectum, and the bladder. The advantage of this approach compared to, say, a regular segmentation or even a deterministic one is that we're not dealing with a huge data set, but only on the sampled point within the bounding box. And this is because the PointNet only requires sample points over a surface. So with this, we significantly reduce the size of the data set to be able to perform this segmentation very quickly. Our training data set here was encompassing approximately 40 labeled clinical images. Labeled means that while we have the CAT scans, we also need what the medical physicist would identify as prostate, bladder, and rectum. So then the neural network can reproduce that later when he validates it and tests it. So this is the structure of the PointNet++. Again, reducing the image to a list of points for which we have the position and even other features, and then perform a classification essentially based on these features that we have extracted. So let's see the first step. When we use Mascar CNN, we can highlight and we can forcefully identify the volumes in which these organs are, which you can see here inside the red circles. So from a high, heavy, data-intense CAT scan, we just reduce our data size to these volumes. You just see here a cross-section of the CAT scan. On the left side, on the left-hand figure, you don't see much, but this is essentially a cloud of points, which sample the points in the regions of interest. And then we apply to the, this you can see it overlaid to the ground truth. So what the medical physicists identified as bladder, prostate, and rectum. What we do next is to perform our PointNet++ segmentation and classify the regions of the bladder, prostate, and rectum accordingly. So the metric that is the most used one to evaluate the accuracy of point cloud segmentation or in general segmentation is called the dice coefficient. The dice coefficient is simply the ratio between the intersection between two regions divided by the sum of them. And the numerator is multiplied by 2. So if the two overlap exactly, the dice coefficient, the two being the ground truth and segmented by the neural network, the dice coefficient will be 1. Less than 1 is a non-ideal dice coefficient. So as you can see, we do pretty well for the bladder and the prostate, while the rectum is less accurately defined. However, this definition has to do with the fact that the rectum is longer, spans longer than the region where the treatment is delivered. We would like, anyway, to increase these prostate dice coefficient higher than 85%. I would say that an ideal segmentation performance will be between 90 and 95. A fully sort of perfect dice coefficient may not be better than a 95% dice coefficient one, but of the order of 90, it's something that's desirable. So to improve that, we implemented two methods. One is the one that we are going to discuss here is the update of the PointNet++ with the newest neural network, which is the point multilayer perceptron. The multilayer perceptron includes not only the position and the quality of the points, but also the relative position between them. So when we apply the point MLP, we expect a slightly better accuracy as well as a faster processing, because data are treated sort of in clusters that have that share closer locations, relative locations. So as expected, the computation time for training for single epoch improved greatly from 11 minutes to 2.5 minutes. And the segmentation also, the segmentation is approximately 10 times faster for the point MLP. So these This was the accuracy. This was the computation time comparison from an accuracy perspective, from an accuracy point of view. The accuracy of the two is essentially comparable. So to further increase it, to further improve this accuracy, this accuracy comparison here is compared to other models based mainly on UNet, which is also a traditional convolutional neural network, by other authors on similar prostate cancer. Again, prostate segmentation is extremely challenging because especially the prostate and the bladder in the top region of the prostate partially overlap. So that overlapping region is very difficult to segment automatically. So as you can see, at the end, the performance of other neural networks is comparable to what we achieved. But at the same time, we still want to do better and improve it. And to do this, what we are working right now is the enhancing of the data set using a synthetic data set. One of the main limitations of machine learning, especially applied to clinical data, is the availability of the data, especially labeled data. So we need to overcome this relatively small data set size. We do perform data augmentation, such as adding noise, rotating the image, and so on. But the information that those traditional data augmentation provide is not much higher than the initial data set. So what we can do instead is generate synthetic data set with digital phantoms. XCAT is a high-resolution, well-known digital human phantom that can be used to produce simulated CAT scan images, like those that you see on the right-hand side. XCAT has some flexibility to edit the phantom size and volume, but it's not enough for us. We want to really replicate that variability that characterizes the clinical images. So to do that, we have edited the phantom generation process and altered the process shape, essentially editing in a smooth way the position of the nodes that define the prostate in this case. And what you see here in this figure is an example of an altered phantom where the relative position of the bladder and the prostate, as well as their shape, is slightly changed. So with this, we hope that we will, while maintaining the fast segmentation, we'll be able to also improve upon the accuracy and the dice coefficient that we have at the so the ultimate goal here is again to remove and reduce the safety margins to reduce the dose to surrounding healthy tissues in prostate cancer. So this concludes the first method to implement radiation protection in radiation therapy. Next one will be focused more on dose measurement and will be applied to hadron therapy, so charged particle-based external radiotherapy. So if there's any question in the meantime about the first method, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, real quick, Angela. So there's two questions in the QA. So if you'd be happy, could you answer them before I stop the recording then? I think the first one deals with part one of your talk, and the second question is on this recent part.
Yes, just a second. Let me open it.
Just
But actually, for the carbon graph, what's particular reason the carbon graphic is higher than that of the proton? Okay, let me go back. Let's see here. Great. So what you see here is a comparison between protons and carbon ions of different energies. The fact that they have different energies is needed to achieve roughly comparable depth, roughly comparable Bragg peak location. So the question is, why is the carbon ion dose higher than the proton dose? Well, as we have discussed, the dose in charged particles is given by the ionization density of the particle, and the ionization density will increase with z of the particle itself. So it is expected that the carbon is going to have a higher conformality. And is also going to have a higher RBE. So the relative dose between these two is essentially a result of the interaction of the charge particle interaction with the tissue. Is application of the Bethe-Bloch equation. If you look at the dA and dx, is going to be higher because z higher here, and the second question, yeah, the RBE is effectively affected by many factors, not just the ionization density, not just the LET of the tissue. So this is a great question. As a matter of fact, the RBE for protons is approximately 10% higher compared to X-rays, but the RBE for carbon ions is still being debated. So this is an active research topic. So the endpoint, the radiation sensitivity of the tissue, these all are affecting the RBE. Second question is, who is primarily responsible for patient radiation protection and why? So in a clinical setting, we have several professional figures who make sure that radiation protection of the patient, actually also of the workers, is implemented. The main figure here is the medical physicist. The medical physicist, in cooperation with the radiation oncologist, will design the treatment plan. And we'll make sure that, again, the fractionation is suitable for the particular organ and for all the other considerations that need to be taken into account, including other therapies that the patient may be undergoing at the same time. So this gives me a chance to thank our clinical collaborators at the OSF Healthcare in Peoria, in Illinois, in particular Dr. Herman and Ms. Kadishe Balaje, and they provided us with the images to be able to implement our segmentation algorithm. Great, thanks for the questions. I hope I answered them, and I want to go ahead and talk about the second method to implement radiation protection here, which is measuring the dose.